Hi, everyone. We're just going to wait for folks to join, so please just be patient and we'll get started momentarily. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. While we're waiting for folks to join us, I'm just going to share a quick little poll if folks are interested in answering these questions for us. And please feel free to chat us, let us know where it is that you are joining us from today. And we will just get started momentarily. Really excited to get started with our webinar today, which is slated to last about 30 minutes. So hopefully that's not too much time out of your day, and we hope that it'll be super helpful. So just give us 1 minute and then we'll get started. All right, folks, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'll keep the poll open, so feel free to continue to answer the questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now so that we can see our host today, Jennifer, who will be joining us shortly. So I will just give a brief introduction. If you have not if you're not familiar with Jennifer's book, it's called Cruising Through Caregiving, and we are super excited to spend a little time with Jennifer today to ask your questions around caregiving, especially given what it is that we are all going through. So as I mentioned, Jennifer is the author of Cruising Through Caregiving, Reducing the Stress of Caring for Your Loved One, and a longtime gerontology instructor at Johns Hopkins University's Certificate on Aging program. She is one of less than 800 certified speaking professionals worldwide and has been featured in national media such as the Wall Street Journal, US News and World Report, HLN, CBS, ABC, Sirius XM, and many, many more. When she's not working, Jennifer is fantasizing about when she can wander the aisles of TJ Maxx and Marshalls without a face mask. Please join me in welcoming from Kent Island, Jennifer FitzPatrick.
You know, I don't know if anybody else is feeling this way, but my standards for what's exciting right now have changed a lot. So I really am excited to go back to TJ Maxx and Marshalls at some point, and hoping that they survive all this and not have to wear a face mask.
Yeah, exactly. We're with you. So, folks, we really want this to be conversational, so please feel free to go ahead and start entering any questions that you have in the Q&A box or the chat box, and I will go ahead and feed those to Jennifer. But I guess just to get started, Jennifer, can you give us a sense of sort of the premise of your book and maybe some of the guiding principles?
Oh, sure. So I have been in the field of healthcare and senior care since I was in high school, and I'm 46, so it's about 30 years now. And my background has always been in working with family caregivers. And over and over and over, I saw family caregivers just struggling so much and experiencing so much stress. So I decided to write Cruising Through Caregiving because I wanted every caregiver to know that there are ways to reduce your stress if you're open to them. Every single chapter in Cruising Through Caregiving is a different way to reduce your stress. So whatever your stress level is today, whether 0, I doubt you're at a 0, but if you're at 100, you can get to a 90, you can get to an 80. There are a lot of different ways that we can reduce our stress as family caregivers. And I also wanted caregivers to know that while your loved one is very important, you're very important too. And so your life can't only be about your loved one. They deserve your love, your time, your attention, your care, but you deserve a lot of that also. So that's the whole premise of Cruising Through Caregiving, Alex.
That's great. And self-care is something that we've definitely been focusing on at HFC, especially through the COVID crisis. And we know that practicing self-care isn't always easy. Maybe you could start off by describing the 3 types of caregivers that you talk about in your book.
Sure. So in Cruising Through Caregiving, I talk about the concept of, I make it a boating analogy. So cruising. So I say that the first type of caregiver is a primary caregiver, and I liken that to a captain of a ship. Or you might liken it to a manager at a hotel. We don't want a captain on a ship to do everything. Just like if you went to a hotel, you don't want the manager of the hotel doing everything, or the manager of a restaurant. They want to lead, they want to guide. They're the primary one that's in charge, but they guide. And so the captain of the caregiving ship, your primary caregiver, which probably many of you identify as, you are in charge, but it's your job to, while you want to do certain tasks for your loved one and on behalf of your loved one, you really also want to delegate. And who do you delegate to? The other types of caregivers. So the secondary caregivers, I liken that person to a first mate on a ship, or maybe an assistant store manager or an assistant restaurant manager. And that person, the secondary caregiver would do a lot maybe for your loved one, maybe do some of the doctor's appointments, maybe stay with them sometimes. But also they might do some tasks for you. They might arrange to have your lawn mowed. They might arrange to bring meals over so you don't have to cook. And then the third type of caregiver I talk about is the tertiary caregiver. And the tertiary caregiver is somebody that simply does tasks to support you. So I'm going to give you an example of a colleague of mine who was had some tertiary caregivers helping. So this colleague of mine, she would fly, she had 2 parents that had some health issues, and she would fly in to help out maybe every 4 or 6 weeks from a different city. Now, her sister was the primary caregiver for the parents. And so my colleague was a secondary caregiver. So she would come and stay for about a week, every 4 to 6 weeks to help out. She was a secondary, did a lot directly for mom and dad. But one of the beautiful ways that people were tertiary caregivers, one example is there were friends of my colleague's parents who in that city said, when you fly in, it's so expensive for you to fly, you're taking time off of work. At least when you're in town, so you don't have to get a rental car, why don't we give you one of our vehicles so you can use it while you're in town? And so these older adults that were friends of mom and dad, they weren't going to come over and help out in the bathroom, or they weren't going to be able to drive mom and dad to doctor's appointments, but they were able to lend their car. There's so many ways that people can contribute. And I thought, what a beautiful example of a family that is accepting help. Think about how good it made the friends feel to do something to help, knowing that they weren't able to do something hands-on.
That's such a great example, and really a very accessible model to think about as we go through our caregiving journey. How would you say embracing the 3 caregiver model can help reduce stress for those of us who are involved in dementia caregiving?
What I find for so many family caregivers who are in that primary caregiver role, maybe you're a spouse, maybe you're an adult child, and you find yourself in that primary caregiver role, we find a lot of those folks are in what I call martyr syndrome. And I write a whole chapter about that in Cruising Through Caregiving. that you're literally murdering yourself. Your health is suffering. Your mental health is suffering. And when you embrace the idea that, okay, maybe other people in the friends and family network, in Cruising Through Caregiving, I have a exercise called the MET exercise, and you can download it for free at cruisingthroughcaregiving.com. But it's an exercise on determining how do you find friends and family and neighbors and people from your faith community to fill in for the roles of secondary and tertiary caregivers. But when you start allowing people in, it's going to reduce your stress. I know I hear a lot of pushback from a lot of primary caregivers. Well, I can't let somebody else in because they're not going to do it as perfectly as I would do it, or they're going to do it differently, or it's a risk. It is a risk to let people help, because is it possible they're not going to do it perfectly? Is it possible they're not going to do it the way that you do it? Definitely. They're not going to do it perfectly, and they're not going to do it the way you do it. But maybe start out with small, with different ways that you can experiment with. Like maybe let people in your friend, family, faith community know that you're willing to accept meals. Let somebody in your family make those calls, or use a website like Lots of Helping Hands, where people can sign up for, or meal train, when people can sign up to bring and drop a meal off. I know right now we're social distancing, so it's tough. But when you start small, if you have that anxiety about letting people in. Now, one reason that people say, I've asked for help. I'm the only adult kid in the family that's helping mom and dad. My brother's useless, my sister's useless. I'm wondering if we have any caregivers out there that feel that way. And we'd love to hear from you if you have had that experience. There are going to be people who let you down. There's no question. There are going to be people that don't show up for you, that don't help you. In fact, there are a lot of estrangements that occur in caregiving. But if you put that energy out there that you're willing to accept some help, maybe your sister's useless, maybe your brother's not going to help. But guess what? I bet you when you start putting the word out that you're open, it might be that there's a neighbor who's gone through dementia caregiving that you're really not that close with, but once they hear about what you're going through, they're going to step up and be there for you in a way that's unexpected.
That's such a really important point to make, just in terms of how we approach accepting help and then our own self-care. Do you have tips, or have you been seeing anything among caregivers that you are in touch with in terms of how we can take better care of ourselves, certainly now among, social distancing and the coronavirus crisis, but in general?
Alex, do you mind if I just answered it? Diane wrote in, so I'd just like to respond to Diane, if that's all right. Okay. Diane says, I'm a first mate caregiver for my mom. My stepfather is the captain, and he's 77 years old. I find myself working hard to make sure I show him the respect of letting him make the directional choices. He's read your book, likes it. Thank you. I really appreciate that, Diane. Diane, I really, really appreciate what you're saying. And I bet your stepfather really appreciates that. Because here's the thing. There's a lot of families, especially when there's a step parent or a second marriage, something like that. There are a lot of adult kids that would try to take ownership, try to take over. And if your stepfather's doing a good job, I mean, that's beautiful that you're saying, you know what, I want to be a good first mate. I want to support my stepfather. I want to, let him take the direction because he is officially her next of kin. He's the decision maker. I think that's really beautiful. And I will tell you, Diane, you need to give yourself a lot of credit for that, because I can't tell you how many families I have worked with where that does not happen. Now, it's one thing, of course, if the spouse or the step parent is just not taking care of mom, right? But if they are and they're doing a decent job, you are creating harmony in the caregiving crew. So thank you so much, Diane. I really appreciate that. Really, thank you for writing in. And I hope you're in a support group where you can share that with other people, because a lot of people struggle with that concept of deferring sometimes to that primary caregiver. So Alex, I am sorry. Would you mind repeating that other question that you had?
No, not at all. I'm glad you were able to respond to Diane's question. So yeah, the question really being, how can caregivers take better care of themselves in general and right now more specifically?
So right now, I want everybody to be, so in general, of course, I call this in cruising through caregiving, I call this the boring advice that nobody wants to hear, because everybody kind of knows it, but is everybody really doing it? Maybe not. So, you want to try to eat healthfully. You want to try to get exercise. You want to try to sleep at least 7 hours a night. And I know some people will probably say, I've never gotten 7 hours in my life, but try to sleep as much as is right for you. Try to minimize your alcohol and caffeine. Try to keep up with what your doctor recommends for you, especially if you personally have any chronic health conditions. So I know y'all know that, and I don't want to spend too much time on that. But what I think is really critical is, as far as self-care under normal circumstances, but even right now, is for you to decide what exactly your boundaries are. So, and again, there's exercises in Cruising Through Caregiving that you can download free at cruisingthroughcaregiving.com. And actually, Alex will share with you at the end how you can get a free copy from Hilarity, or HFC, and Oasis Senior Advisors. But as far as boundaries go, I think, so it's funny, when my family was taking care of my grandmother, at one point, my dad was 63 years old at the time. My grandmother was 85 and a half, and all of us were taking turns sleeping over at her house. She was adamant she didn't want home care. She wouldn't move to senior living. So we were all staying over. And my dad said one day, he called me and he says, I'm done sleeping over there. I can't do it anymore. I don't get a good night's sleep, and it's disrupting my evening routine. And I remember I said to him, Dad, you don't have to. You're allowed to set that boundary. And I think those are the sorts of boundaries that all of us have to decide for ourselves. Like some families, if you're a secondary caregiver, say a first mate, or you're a tertiary caregiver, you might say, I can only bring a meal over twice a week, or mom can live with me, but once she becomes incontinent, that's going to be a limit that I think I might need more help. So I think considering your boundaries, and again, listen, if you love your loved one, which I know that you all do, you want to be there for them and you want to give them your love and give them your care, but they don't deserve every bit of your energy. You will be useless to them if you give them all of your time and your energy. So setting boundaries is crucial. And if you have a hard time with that, I recommend a good therapist or a good support group, because most likely, and I know HFC has some really good support groups virtually that they offer, but you will find the strength to set those boundaries with support groups, maybe talk to a trusted friend that you can vent to and talk to them, and somebody who really has your best interests at heart. As far as right now during the pandemic, I want you to remember that I know things are different, and I know that a lot of us are saying, well, I mean, I used to love going and getting a pedicure, and right now, depending on what state you're in, I can't do that, or maybe it's allowed right now, but you think I don't feel safe enough right now. What are you going to do right now? Like, what are your self-care things going to be right now? So for me, and I'm not caregiving at the moment, but just one thing for me right now has been doing exercising. Like that's something for me every single day is non-negotiable. Whether that's for you that you have to get out every day for a walk, or whether you're going to do an online yoga class, or on Amazon Prime, there's a video you want to do for yoga, or you're going to take an hour to read a book. If you, and you might, I think what I would say is, if I'm saying all this, and if you're one of those people that's saying, yeah, but, because that's a common response for caregivers. Yeah, but the healthcare crisis, I can't take an hour to read a book. It's time to consider, do you need home care? Home care agencies are still going into the home. Can you hire somebody a couple of hours a week, or apply for the HFC grant if you don't already have it? So what I find is when a caregiver really has their wall up, if I say, well, can you spend 20 minutes a day walking, or can you take a bath once a week? And they say, yeah, but you don't understand. It's time to think about, maybe you're in your own way. So at least decide one small thing. If you are stressed out, if on a scale of 0 to 100, your stress level is over a 50, you got to decide on one small thing this week that you're going to commit, this weekend or next week, that you're going to commit to doing a little bit differently.
Yeah, we all have to start somewhere. I think that's a good point, and to be gentle with ourselves as we get started on taking better care of ourselves. We do have another great question from Diane. She asks if you can talk about how to discuss things that are difficult to talk about. For instance, we are noticing that mom needs someone to help her bathe, but when my stepfather suggested that we get someone to help her in the shower, she said, absolutely not. And she says she's also reading your book and finding it helpful.
Oh, thanks, Diane. So Diane, let me ask you this. I'd like to ask a follow-up question if I could. So my question for you, Diane, is how far along in first of all, what type of dementia, if you know what type of dementia your mom has, and then where would you put her? Would you say she's in the early stages where she's got some memory loss and she's got some issues, but she remembers, she's in the moment more often than not, her judgment is not so bad right now? Would you say she's more in the mid stage where she's having a lot of, okay, Diane gets it. I didn't know, mid stage of Alzheimer's. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you, Diane. So you get it. Some family members don't, they're not quite sure, but middle stages. Okay. What I would suggest, and this is going to maybe sound a little counterintuitive to some folks, but oftentimes when somebody is in the mid stages, especially, having a rational, reasonable conversation with that person does not work. And so your stepfather, I'm guessing, may be approaching it like, I think it would be great. I feel like it would be more comfortable for you, for me, if we got someone to help you bathe. He's probably being very reasonable and lovely. He sounds like a good guy if you can get along with him that well. And she's saying, no, absolutely not. What I find when someone has advanced dementia, which your mom does, that you need to sort of just start taking action. Okay, so maybe you bring somebody in and you use more of a declarative sentence, like Mary is here today. Oh, she's going to help us in the kitchen, or she's stopping by. She could maybe even come by. I don't know how it is or how you're quarantining or what state you're in. I'm not really sure, but maybe if you're still going over to the house, you might present the home care aide as a friend, and that she's coming to do some housekeeping. You slowly introduce this person, and that perhaps they start to be comfortable, and then she's having some issues in the bathroom, and then Mary says, oh, you know what, let me help with that. I have a background. I've helped people with this before. I'm not saying it's foolproof. I'm not saying that it's a perfect way to introduce somebody, but I find a lot of times, now listen, when somebody does not have dementia and their brain is operating just like yours and mine, you have to talk to them about it. There's no question. They're a grown-up. The person with dementia, of course, is an adult too, but their brain, their mind is regressing and they're not able to make rational decisions. So what I would say is try to step away from asking and trying to reason with her and maybe start to take action. And I know that that's okay, your husband and you are, okay, you're all in the same quarantine bubble. And Diane, listen, I'm not saying that that's perfect, and I'm not saying you're going to get pushed back. Here's the thing. When an aide begins to work with a family member, or even when your loved one starts to go to adult day, or your loved one moves to senior living, whatever the situation is, so many families are like, well, mom doesn't like it. Mom doesn't want to. You know what? She's not going to like it at first in a lot of cases, but that doesn't mean that we don't persevere. It's like you almost have to go through some rough periods to get to the other end, where so many family members have dealt with this, like, oh, I don't want an aide. And then suddenly the aide is there a couple weeks and it's seamless. I think you also have to be mindful of the right fit for having an aide come in. So just trying to be mindful of the first person that comes in does the personality match? Does that work? But again, it's definitely not a perfect solution. And I know it can feel a little awkward to just take action without your loved one's input, but sometimes it is necessary.
And I'll just remind folks that we've got a few great webinars on our YouTube page dealing with communication. We just did one last week on compassionate communication. There was another one we did earlier in April about sort of practicing the yes and doing a little improv. And so to your point, Jennifer, really moving away from the expectation that you're going to have a real rational conversation and how you employ some of these techniques. So please feel free to catch those on your own time. So we've got some time left for additional Q&A. If other folks have questions for Jennifer, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box or the chat box. And in the meantime, Jennifer, can you talk a little bit about anything that you've observed or learned about caregiving just over the last 2 months during this coronavirus?
Oh, okay. So a lot. So first of all, 18% of us have an anxiety disorder, whether it's obsessive compulsive disorder, panic disorder. And if you personally have that affliction, and maybe you've never been diagnosed, but maybe you identify, I've always been a worrier, or I've always gotten stressed out, or my nerves are bad, or maybe you actually have an anxiety disorder diagnosis, your stress level is probably even higher now as a caregiver because there's so much out of your control. So just take it easy on yourself. Please talk to your doctor about there's telemedicine, there's teletherapy right now that can help if you don't have a good therapist. But more than ever, it's really important to stay connected with these types of resources, because we don't want this sort of thing, the social distancing, and a lot of experts are saying really we should call it physical distancing, because socially you can still engage to a certain extent. We're engaging with one another right now. But what I would say is just make sure you're not isolating. Isolation and loneliness is very, very bad for you, me, all of us. Doesn't matter if you're caregiving or not, but it's also very bad for your loved one who has dementia. So obviously you want to be safe. You want to make sure that you're doing what your local officials and the CDC are telling you to do. But right now, you want to take even more, especially if maybe your loved one used to go to adult day and now they can't. You want to do activities with them, whether it be that you're playing music more, you're looking at old photographs, you're baking together, you're taking advantage of good weather, and you're getting outside when you're able to do that. Because more than ever, it's so important to just try to increase your sense of normalcy during this very odd period. We're going to get through it. It's temporary. It really is temporary. We're going to get back over the hump to a new normal at some point. But the other thing that I think everyone should be considering right now is, after this crisis, what's next? Because I feel like whatever problems you've had in caregiving, whatever stressors have been there, are probably now under a microscope. So is it time maybe to, if you've never utilized home care, is it time to consider that for now, or maybe after, when you feel more comfortable? Is it time to consider adult day? Is it time to consider senior living? Or use the MET exercise in cruising through caregiving? And please go ahead and identify people in your friend, your neighbor, your family network. Right now is a great time to connect with other people, because unless somebody's an essential worker, in most states, they're home. Talk to them about what's going on with your caregiving situation. Let them know that you're accepting meals and you're accepting friendly phone calls for your mom just to keep her occupied a couple times a day. So I think right now, most of us have such a generosity of spirit to try to help others, especially when we feel so helpless. A lot of us feel helpless and out of control. I think right now is a great time to let people know that you're willing to accept some help with your caregiving.
That's such a great point. Thanks so much, Jennifer. Any final questions or scenarios while we still have Jennifer here? And sorry for my calendar reminder.
It was happening to me too.
Yeah, happy to take any additional questions. And if there aren't, I guess we'll just end with this, and you've sort of touched on this a little bit, but any other resources you would recommend at this time for caregivers?
Always HFC. I have so much love and respect for what they're doing. They have so many wonderful programs for you. Alzheimer's Association's 800 number, 800-272-3900. It's open 24 hours a day. I'm not saying that they can fix all your problems, but they are a great resource if your loved one's up in the middle of the night and you're pulling out your hair and you don't know how to handle the situation. But 800-272-3900, open 24 hours a day during this crisis. It's a person to talk to that knows about dementia, and they are staff people. They are not volunteers. They are experienced staff persons. Your local area agency on aging, they are still working. If you're looking for where yours are, if you're not familiar with your local area agency on aging, you can go to N as in Nancy, the number 4a.org, n4a.org, and plug in your zip code, and it'll tell you where your local area agency on aging is. And it's all kinds of services, free, low cost, paid, to help support older adults and family caregivers. And it's a great place to get familiar with if you're not already. Diane just did write one question in. I just want to respond to that before we wrap up. So Diane, you've looked into and visited places, but it's difficult to picture putting her in a place. I know it is. Here's the thing about that. You and your family might very well be able to do this until she passes away. That's possible, certainly very possible. But I think you have to always be looking at, is it feasible? Will this work long term? Is this something that you and your husband and your stepfather can all do? Do you have plenty of friends and family and neighbors to help? Because she's in mid-stage right now. It gets a lot harder. It becomes more physically taxing in the later stages. So it's something to think about. So what I would suggest is keep an open mind. I think it's a really tough decision, and every family, listen, I write about this in Cruising Through Caregiving. There's not one way to be a good caregiver. There are plenty of caregivers that do it forever, but if you're going to do it at home forever, you got to make sure you have help in place. You got to. I talk a little bit about former First Lady Nancy Reagan in Cruising Through Caregiving, and she was really public about not wanting to put President Reagan in senior living. But it made sense for her because she had, I think if President Reagan was ever going to wander, I'm guessing it would be the Secret Service that would have stopped him and brought him back in the house. Most of us don't, even if you have a lot of financial resources, most of us don't have that sort of infrastructure at the house. So it's just a matter of figuring out what makes sense. But if all of you start to really lose steam and you're having health ailments and you're having mental health struggles and you're not sleeping, you've really got to consider what's going to be the best for the whole caregiving crew, not just mom, not just you, not just your stepfather, but everybody. What makes sense? So I get it. I get that it's a really tough decision, and it's just something that each family has to decide for themselves what the best long-term plan looks like. And if you can keep your mom home forever with the proper resources, that's great. But don't feel badly if at some point you you change your mind. The other thing that I would say, Diane, is Oasis Senior Advisors, who has been the sponsor for the copies of Cruising Through Caregiving, going to HFC support group participants and grant recipients. If you go to oasissenior-advisors.com, those folks are completely free to you, and they help you to identify community and adult day and those types of things that are a good match for you if you tell them your criteria. Again, I'm not saying that they can fix all your problems, but they're another great resource, oasissenior-advisors.com. Completely free to you, the family.
That's so amazing. Thank you, Jennifer, for all those suggestions and for your time today and for congratulations to all of you who were able to join us and stick with us for the past 30 minutes. This will be posted on our YouTube page, so you can refer to it again later. We also have a previous conversation we had with Jennifer at the very beginning of the COVID crisis. Remember that? Way back in March?
Oh, we thought, oh, everything's going to be completely normal by Memorial Day.
Yeah, and here we are.
At least hoping it would be.
So there's more information there. And please feel free to contact us at any point at info@wearehfc.org, which I put in the chat room. We hope to see you again on future webinars. We do plan on continuing through June. And I left the information. If you're interested in a free copy of the book, please email us at info@wearehfc.org. Please enjoy your weekend, everybody. Take care of yourselves. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you, everybody. We're thinking of you. Thanks for all you're doing for your loved ones. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, HFC.
Yeah, take care, everybody. Thanks.